I call Clayton Mitchell.
Mr Chair, it's a great privilege again to be standing in the House to now come back and talk about part two, which is the health and safety duties. And we do actually have a supplementary order paper in here along with the Greens and the Minister himself. Before I go into that, just to reflect with the Minister, I hope the praise that we've been giving the Right Honourable Member doesn't go to his head, that he still keeps this interaction going, because it's very, very important. I would also like to reflect for a moment, just rewinding the clock, to get some clarity around Part 10, Section 10, which of course is to do with those high-risk plant. And if we could get some clarity, because that will come up a little bit later on in 227 further down the bill, if you could give us some clarity on that, I would be very appreciative, and I don't want to keep going backwards. But for the purpose of the people back home and sitting in the gallery that don't have this magnificent piece of legislation in front of them to go through and peruse as we all are, I think it's very important to just talk for a quick second about the reasonably practicable, because it does come up quite a lot. So this new bill does introduce reasonably practicable, and it is businesses must do what they can reasonably to keep workers and those others affected by work safe and healthy. So that's going to come up quite a lot. I would also like to just take a moment to look at Section 52 in Part 2, which is about duty to notify notifiable events. And I think that's a very commendable part of this bill in Part 2. I think it's very, very simple, very, very plain English, but there is a duty to notify of any harm being caused to your workers. And then the second part to that is 53, is a requirement to keep records. Now, once you can measure a problem, you can then manage the problem. And I think this is a fantastic tool to enable health and safety for the future, and just tracking where it's going and how it's going, and take this moment also to look at some of the industries around the country that are on a decline with the number of serious events, illnesses and deaths within their businesses. And I think New Zealand Railways have had a remarkable change of direction, about 30% less of injuries in their space, and that's a culture shift that's happened from the top down and the bottom up simultaneously to achieve that great results, and we would like to see that continue in that. Also, the logging industry having a remarkable downturn in deaths, and again it comes down to that bottom up as well as a top down approach. Mr Chair, primary duty of care is really what this part is all about, and so what we've got here is Section 30, and it says here, a PCBU must ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health and safety of workers. And I would just also like to say that the current legislation that we've got there, I think sums it up very, very nicely, and it doesn't show up anywhere in this new legislation. But clauses 15, 17 and 19 of the current legislation, which is the duties of employers, employees and the self-employed people. It says, every employer, employee or a self-employed person shall take all practicable steps to ensure that no action or inaction of any person, whether it be an employer, an employee or a self-employed person, while at work harms themselves or any other person. I think that's just absolutely fantastic, and it would have been good to see that in this new bill, because I think it encapsulates everything with as far as a duty of care goes, which is what we're trying to resolve here. Now, I know the clock is ticking, and my time was very, very short with these 5-minute sessions that we get, but we do have a supplementary order paper and amendment in here which amends clauses 43. What we are proposing is, after clause 43.2 on page 52, we would like to see inserted, a person does not commit an offence against subsection 1 if the person is a self-employed individual who is both a PCBU, a person conducting the business or undertaking, and a worker in a small or medium-sized business enterprise in the event of an accidental death of their spouse, de facto partner or civil union partner, who is also a PCBU and a worker in the same small or medium-sized business. Now, that sounds very convoluted, but quite simply, we are very concerned again about the unintended consequences of this bill. That piece of legislation that New Zealand First is trying to put in is a pragmatic solution to what we see as a potential issue that has been overlooked. And this is specifically around where a and let me just use it for an example, but it might not preclude other businesses in a similar situation. Where you have got a farmer, Mr Chair,
Clayton Mitchell.
Where you have, thank you, Mr Chair, where you have got yourself a farmer and his wife living together, they are directors on the farm, they are owners of the farm, they are clearly PCBUs and workers at the same time. Now, the situation where the farmer goes out and has a fatal accident, and we're talking about accidents here, we're not talking about anything nefarious and horrible, but under this legislation, the wife, who is also a PCBU, who is responsible for her partner's death, her husband's death, could be up for some very, very heavy penalties, fines and potential some imprisonment. What we are trying to preclude is the loss of a loved one is far enough to not warrant the fact that they may lose their business or their farm as well as. Now, I think thinking about it was a very, very difficult piece of legislation amendment to put in, and we have taken this to select committee, and it didn't get the support that it deserves. But I know back out there in the real world where people are concerned about their loved ones, their safety, but also the fact that if there is an accidental death, that they could be actually losing everything as well as their loved one. I think to put that to the House needs to be very heavily considered, and support for that supplementary order paper would be certainly well appreciated by all those rural farmers and small business operators who want to be able to leave a legacy behind to their loved ones and if they do, and they are in fact involved in a fatality in a workplace. So, Mr Chair, we certainly do have parts of Part 2 with regards to duties that we do support. To reflect on that, we do support the engagement process, the reporting process and the record keeping. We think that's absolutely fantastic. We do have some concerns about parts that potentially will have some very long-term and damning effects on those loved ones left behind in a fatality or an accident. Thank you, Mr Chair.
I call Alistair Scott.
Thank you, Mr Chair.